5Q. Hello. Good morning, everybody. We are here and we are ready to have our finance meeting for the Cincinnati School Board. And, we're going to go around the room. And first, our wonderful technician who we all answer at this point in time. Rob will explain if you want to participate. He will give you that cue, and then we'll start over there, Cody, and do the roundtable.
Good morning. This is Rob. If you'd like to participate in today's meeting, please click the hand icon on the bottom right corner of your screen. We will chat to ask you your affiliation to the district, and then we will bring you in at the end of the meeting for the speaking of the public. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cody Hutchins. I'm contract analyst.
Good morning, Michael Guston, Assistant Treasurer.
Good morning, Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning, Lauren Roberts, Chief Audit Executive.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting.
Corrine Moffitt, Board Member.
Keith Bolton, Board Member.
Brandon Craig, Board Member.
Arnett Wright, Superintendent.
Sally Grimes, Executive Director, Activities Beyond the Classroom.
Appreciate everybody being here, and we're going to get a good start. We have, not surprisingly, as we always do, a full agenda. There's fewer numbers, but bigger topics, so I think that all weighs out pretty well. If we can get started, Madam Treasurer, we'll begin with number one, and if you'll do the introduction for those items. And we're also going to amend or change or revise, whichever word you'd like to use for parliamentary procedure, the agenda as we go.
As we go, okay. So first topic is the standard monthly financial reports that will be presented by both Kevin and Mike. And so, Kevin.
Sure. All right. So Rob, I'll actually start on slide 2. Or actually slide 4, I'm sorry. So at the beginning, it has it notes some of the differences. I'm just going to talk to those as we go through the graphs. So this one actually shows our cash balance over the last 3 years at the end of May. So you'll notice that this May, actually, the cash balance is down. There's a couple things that have contributed to that. When we get to expenses, you'll see our expenditures are up about $46 million over last year. But at the same time, our encumbrances are down. So if you notice, encumbrances were $33 million at this point last year. They're only $24 million at this point. So that's approximately $10 million timing difference. So those things were liquidated earlier than in the previous year. And so we're anticipating as we get to the end of June that 24 million will be, even less as things pay out. I think today's the last AP run as those things pay out. Next slide, please. So in terms of revenue, if you see this year compared to last year, our total dollars are pretty much consistent with the prior year. I think we overall had a little bit higher budgeted revenue last year. So if you look at the percentages, you'll see we're already at 95% of our budget for this year. I know in June, there's a number of things that have already come in. We had about $12 million come from the city of Cincinnati related to TIFs. We get that big chunk twice a year. So that's a big thing that's come in. We still have, at this point, still had 2 foundation payments from the state, which would come in June as well. So I think we're pretty good as far as targeting on revenue. Next slide. This shows it by source, that you can see actual this year versus last year, as well as the budget. The next slide, please. This shows the expenditures, and of course there's such big dollars that the difference in the graphs is kind of hard to see, but the difference between expenditures this year and last year is again 46 million, while encumbrances are down about 10 million. Next slide. is really where we try to look at the unallocated expenditures, unallocated appropriations. At this point, the end of May, it's even hard to see on here. 2%, I believe, is the unallocated, about 15 million. We do have salary underspend, which we've talked a little bit about. We anticipate through the end of June being about 19 million plus benefits, which is a fortunate thing because that will offset some of the other expenditures that we have coming up soon.
What was your question?
19
What was the
million for
number?
salaries and about 3 million for benefits, so a total of 22 million. Right, now going to tuition assistance. So since preschool was over in May, this will be the end of the fiscal year for tuition assistance. We will make an adjustment to record the 6.7 million against the preschool cost center that's set up in the general fund. So it'll be 6.7 million will be reallocated to that fund. One of the things we always point out here is the number of students that were included in the tuition assistance calculations. At the end of May, it was 991 students versus 889 last year and 605 the year before. Total number of preschool students served at this point was 2,059. Next slide is just kind of a financial statement of what happens with that preschool fund. You'll see the tuition assistance, the 6.7 million, the 11 million for United Way. There'll be a few more expenses here related to some salary expenses and, you know, some other purchase orders that may pay out. But essentially, as you can see this year, their net income was negative 4 million, which is showing that we're eating into that reserve, which we've talked about ad nauseum actually. But last year there was an underspend in terms of what the revenue was versus the expense. I think that's all I have on the slides. If you have any questions.
Questions, Vice President?
You know, I always have questions, but I have to process, so I'll send them to you if I don't get them today. I just, can you explain? Well, I lied. So can, the salary underspend, you said that that's a good and a bad thing. Explain.
So, what I mean by a good thing is looking at it from, we do have other areas that we've had expenses, you know, come up. And so if we were not in a situation of having the underspend, we would be looking for funds to cover those. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the downside of the underspend too is that we have the vacant positions that we're trying to fill. So that to me, you know, is kind of the negative side of that. But.
Okay. And I do have one more question regarding like title money. This was general fund.
Yes.
And this, but it doesn't, are we going to hear about title or the, okay. I just wanted to ask. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
But yeah, this focuses mainly on general fund, just like the 5-year forecast.
Okay.
Those kind of things. But then next, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Well, I just said, I had
Oh, sorry.
questions. That's okay.
I was ready to move on.
I would like it on additional, I think you said 46 higher expenditures.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually do have a
What that might,
comparison.
what contributed to that?
Yeah, I think I
I
put
don't think
here.
that's a surprise, but, you know, it's.
Hopefully not.
So a couple of things I've evaluated in that process is just as an overview. So the school-wide pool previously was done as a transfer, is now allocated to salaries, benefits, purchase services. So first we looked at that, bringing that in. In the past, we've had underspend, just as to note, in the school-wide pool as well. So if you had salary underspend in the general, you also had salary underspend mostly in the school-wide pool. So again, when I mentioned the 19 million for salary underspend, that is now combined because everything took place in the general fund. Some other items, the United Way payment was up for preschool, so that's an additional expense. Getting into some of the other things, transportation expense, at this point, we've paid out more than we paid out at this point last year. So some of that could be timing and other things as well. Some other
Paying it in the same year that it was accrued, yeah.
some other smaller items are like fuel expenses were higher, classroom and computer supplies. Were just a few of the other items that kind of jumped out there.
So the 46 million, you're saying the United Way piece for preschool transportation.
Transportation obviously is up quite a bit over last year.
The budget is over.
So it's up about 17 million.
So that starts to,
Yeah.
begins to be at least 27 million out of the 46 or so, just in two categories.
And like you said, 10 million of it is early liquidation, or, you know, because the encumbrance level is down.
Right.
So that would offset it as well.
Okay, cool. Well, not so cool, but okay. Thank you.
Perfect.
Now you turn it over.
Thank you. I would say there has been a team working on all year, so we should give them credit for trying to get things paid out sooner.
Absolutely.
Have a lot less money at encumbrances that carry over. So I know they put a lot of hard work into working with budget owners. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about state and federal grants. So you have in your packets the giant grant sheet. So obviously, you know, the thing we look at here is the spend goal. So while we try not to spend general fund money, we try to spend grant money. Spend goal at the end of May was 62%. You can see, obviously, which grants made it, which grants didn't make it. Just to kind of remember, you know, it's a 15-month cycle. We have until the end of September to pay out the costs that were incurred by the end of June. So there are, you know, POs out there. There's, you know, some payroll stuff out there as well that's going to get paid out. If you look at the graph, if you don't mind, Rob, going to the graph. Thank you, sir. Yeah, so kind of a cleaner way to look at this is average year-to-date spend over a 3-year average. Obviously we're below goal, but we're trending right on where we were last year. So very close to that.
Explain what you just said.
Okay, so obviously the goal was 62%. That we're at 54, but we're kind of right where we were last year. Last year we were at 55% at this point. This year we're at 54%. So right on. And of course, as always, there's the dip in January is because of getting the carryover. The carryover came in, it has to be budgeted and spent. So we're kind of catching up. If you look at March, April, May, you can see we're catching back up. And the final graph is just the high-level ESSER overview. If you want to flip to that one, Rob. Thank you. You can kind of see where we started, what we've spent to date, and obviously what's still out there. It's also in the chart. So I think Jen talked a little bit, obviously, about our spending on Wednesday, about the ESSER spending and where we project it to be for next year. So.
And then there's also some more information in the list of questions that we're working through. Any questions on state federal grants?
Just a clarifying question. I think on Wednesday, and I just kind of really want to clarify, but then also say it here, there was an $18 million carryover from last year's ESSER to this year's ESSER, right? Is that right?
This year to next year.
This year to next year.
It's an estimate based on what was spent through Monday morning plus the last payroll of the year, of how much underspend is going to be for this year.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes, I think I had the year wrong, so I'm glad to know that it's from last year to this year. What was the savings?
Oh, I don't have that level of detail. I just looked at totals.
I know we saved in the summer last year. I remember hearing
Yeah, so
we saved a considerable amount of money with the summer scholars last year so
Well,
maybe
right.
that's part of it.
I won't know exactly detailed line items until the books are closed. That's why I just did a high level summary.
Sure.
But, you know, even in the general funds, we encumber funds for a year, but we may not fully spend it all out.
Sure.
And so there could be some contracts aren't going to get fully spent. But definitely, summer scholars encumbrances will probably be, the payments will be a lot smaller just because of the number of students that are participating.
Sure. I'm just very curious to see where that savings was. I'm gonna say cut. We talked about this, like reduction, cut, savings, same word if it's in parentheses to me. But where is the savings coming from that we're carrying that over? And then also from ESSER specifically, and then also looking at that from last year to this year, are we carrying it over because we didn't have an opportunity to spend it, or are we carrying it over because we just cut that? Is it back in the budget for?
We haven't cut anything in ESSER yet. So any savings is because there was an allocation to someone and they didn't spend it all.
Okay.
But I will give you the details.
Thank you. Not right now.
Sorry, I think today you're interviewing with principals or something, aren't you? Or talking to them, or is the academy done? It's not, it's Tuesday. Okay, cool. I'm sure it did. All right, and then you have the board questions. You put those aside for a little bit later, or would you want to?
Whenever, what it pleases you.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to that more when we talk a little bit more about budget.
All right, so the annual appropriations are never ready until the day you have to vote on them, because we have to have the last in the minute costs and expenses and everything finished before we can calculate what the ending current year appropriation will be. So I'm not exactly sure why it's on the work plan, because if we've never been able to do it in June at a finance committee.
Yeah, the state has pulled the work plan up.
I understand.
And that's something as whoever wants to revise for the next calendar year, it can come later. So we won't see that until when?
The 26th.
26th. Well, it's the month. That's probably why it's in June.
Well, we have to figure out, I know.
That's probably how that happens.
So the final appropriation for the current year is supposed to be everything that we're spent on, right? But we won't have the year closed yet. Right. But we have to file it with the Hamilton County before June 30. So it's crazy, the timing, because but it's a very refined estimate. But we have to wait to the very last second in order to do the estimate to get it as close to accurate as possible.
Yeah, and we want accurate.
Of course.
We'll just remember as whoever revises the work plan, that's probably
better
to do it in August.
Or July.
Well, it's kind of a moot point by the time July finance comes, right?
Do we need it in August?
Okay.
But we will prepare a temporary appropriation for fiscal year 24 to get the year started. I just don't know what value I'm going to assign to it yet. The 90-day window, or the 90-day estimate, produces a kabillion amendments throughout the year. And then we get caught in then and nows because people forget to amend their contracts. So I want to do something bigger than just 90 days worth of costs. I just haven't figured it out how much yet.
Are there things that keep people from not meeting whatever the goal was regarding the grant expenditures? Is it just?
So last year there was a lot of turnover in staff.
It seems like it's more than normal. Maybe not, might just be.
Well, the carryover came in later than it did the previous year. So that's one. And two, we were trying to be very deliberate about how that carryover money was spent. The superintendent can talk about her plans for that, but, you know, there was turnover in people who managed the Title I, Title II, and Title IV grants. And so having new people take over, get on base, get that learning curve going, and then start spending again, it took a little bit of time. So, but the grants team meets with those large grant people on a regular basis to try to keep them on.
I have
Yes.
just a follow-up. So we talked often about the fact that we have Title I carryover every year. So what's generally the average? Because it's every, I mean,
There's a
from our
limit. It's
conversations,
15% is
every
a
year.
limit. So they released the limit, or they waived the limit during COVID years, but we're back to it again. So, but $3.5 million. This year's carryover was 5 million, I believe, right? Yeah, 5 million. So, and it's just weird because they do it based on the final expenditure reports that are filed by September 30th, but they don't inform us what it's going to be until January. And then we have to develop a budget before we can spend it. And then you have until September to spend it. So you have a very short window of time to spend all that money. And then, or you just keep creating a bigger carryover in the following year because you're always dumping years. That makes sense.
And it's usable carryover.
Yeah.
Because I do remember in our committee meeting, was it last month or maybe 2 months ago, one of the things that was a little jarring was that we, you know, you work through some of this stuff with great specificity, that we do underspend our title money. And I think that, you know, I'm always happy to blame it on pooling, but I blame bad weather on pooling.
Oh, we did a much better job of spending the money on pooling. We left less carryover money on the table then, but changing from pooling it back to normal has created an issue because the funds are so much more restrictive now.
Yeah, well,
And so
It is what it is.
school, it's just taking a time to adjust to the new rules. So,
so for this year, are we anticipating any kind of I mean, do we feel more confident about getting all of our Title I dollars spent in the year or this?
I think we do, but one of the things that happen, because Title I dollars are also at the school level, and so a lot of that carryover comes from there, and monies are put in, say for, I'll use an example of tutoring, right, for a recovery. And if schools don't use those funds, then those funds sit. So one of the things that we talked about is giving updates more frequently of the monies that are already left in Title I, so that if there are other projects that we need to do, that there's a way to organize that, to rework it. So we have, so that it's easier to look at, you know, how the money is being spent, if it's being spent. A lot of the money is in salaries sometimes as well, and so or additional pay. And so if you don't have the staff to do that, then that becomes additional funds.
Yeah, I was going to raise the thought because I know we talked about this. I think it was either last month or the month before, but yeah, entire year in my head together. But the issue in some ways also of that we were trying to get schools to be better at reporting and following up and kind of going along the way, and that's been in some way how we've also removed some of the encumbrances that we've, you know, in the past had, is that we've been able to get folks to take and use these things. I think the grants is a legit area where we are still probably seeing some of that struggle of people allocate funds for something, they want to do it, they have great intentions on doing it, it's ready to be done up until the day it can't be done, and then what do we do with those funds at that point?
So what individuals would, what some may say as well, is the design of Title I specifically. I know we're talking about, you know, a variety of title grants, but Title I is where the majority of the funds are. What the design of those dollars as they go to schools is for it to be used for the students that are in the school that year. What a lot of schools do, and I've seen it this year, so I don't know if that's the norm.
it's the norm.
Okay, so what a lot of schools do, or they would like to do, is keep the money until about March, and then begin to order a lot of things for the next school year, and it's not an approved expenditure. So then what they will say is, well, it's, you know, it's the end of the year, we can't use our funds because you're trying to use funds actually that go into next school year. And so it causes, you know, some challenges with that. And it's not unique to our district. That's just one of the areas that we have to monitor better. So where I've seen real improvement in the area is by doing more of a bi-monthly review of where you are with your dollars. This is what you have budgeted. This is what you've used or you've not used. What needs to be updated at this point so that you don't get to the very end. You have this balloon money that you want to use, and then you're not able to use it because it's not approved. And we know that all title dollars are highly audited, especially for our district.
Because I know we've talked a few times about that challenge, and I think one of the things that we are hearing from some of the other schools is, oh, if there's all this money left, why can't we use it? And I think this also goes a little bit to explaining to those folks as well that, you know, funds are allocated for the specific purpose, and we don't see that it's not being used for the purpose until March. Like, there's not room or space to do some of those allocations for the students that are currently there. So I do think that I applaud the fact that we are trying to attack this situation and address the concern, because also to your point, Jen, if we have to get back down below 3.4%, so it's a big little gap there to go from 5.6 where we are to 3.4.
So there's two things that are going to happen next year. Is that the monthly reviews that the grants group is doing is going to get escalated to the ELT level, so that the ELT member and over that will be much more aware. And then if you recall, during my evaluation presentation, the dashboard by budget unit is going to be reviewed on a regular basis as well. So the schools don't have time to go out and run a whole bunch of financial reports themselves. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. You pull up your dashboard and it's all right there for you. And so we're hoping that that'll help. We've also created the Finance 101 class and made it mandatory for schools to go through. Central office will start going through soon. And then, you know, as financial non-compliance events happen, they'll have to go back to that training again and then, you know, go from there. But we're just going to escalate the whole financial picture on a more regular basis at the leadership team level. Superintendent and I just a couple days ago talked about doing a mid-year budget revision so that we can shift. Funds aren't being spent and they can't explain why. We're going to shift it to an area that needs, you know, funding. Like if our electric bill goes up, then we have to be able to pivot. So so we have some good plans.
Yeah.
All funds. I'm talking all funds, right?
Okay. And
Well, whatever the allowable expenses will be, we'll follow those rules. I'm not suggesting we're going to shift electricity to Title I. No, I'm sorry. No, I just meant like if, and I'm.
I was like, wait a minute.
So I'm just making I'm just making up a scenario. So we have one department who has a project that's budgeted.
I'm listening.
Okay. So we have a department that has a project that's budgeted that for whatever reason doesn't get done or gets delayed or whatever. Those funds can be reallocated to another area, such as, you know, we never know what we look at historical data for electric and utilities, but we all know all of our rates went up, and we don't know if you have a really harsh winter, things change, right? Or a really harsh summer where air conditioning is being used more. It's harder to predict those things. So we're just trying to set ourselves up so that we can pivot if we need to.
Where would that, I'm sorry, where would that shift occur? At the district level to take it from the schools, or it would be like, where would that reallocation? I know this is in theory right now, hopefully not in practice.
I think we're focusing more on central office stuff because that's where most of the underspend, the bigger dollars of underspend occur. Because we always think we're going to accomplish so much more than we do, or we're able to, because things change. You know, the state drops a new rule. I remember when the third grade guarantee got dropped on us in like October or November, and so we had to shift a whole bunch of things to go support third grade guarantee. So stuff happens, and we need to be able to respond and adapt to that. That's all I'm saying. I'm not suggesting taking money away from schools or students.
what are the, I appreciate you doing saying that, but one of the issues, if I recall, in the budget process too, and we know that these title dollars are very specific about what they can use. There's not this giant range of discretion, but we kept hearing, well, they're not even letting us spend our title dollars in the way that we want to or that we should, and we think it still is within the realm of what we're allowed to spend. And so you might want to talk a little bit more about that. Are we suggesting they must have been out of the realm or out of the approved? Because that was one of the things we kept hearing. Well, these are our title dollars. We'd like to spend them on this, and they're making us. I think you guys gave them
Answer
multiple
that. Yeah,
choice.
we did.
We gave them allowable by fund, but so some of the things were like logos, everybody wanted logo masks. Well, you can't use federal funds to do that, but if it was in the pool, it loses its identity, so you have a lot more freedom to spend on things like that. One thing that happened this year was they took their copy click budget and split it into general fund and title fund. You can't use title fund for copies because that's a basic service for the district. And so it didn't, during the budget development process, it didn't get caught that way. And it became an issue when people started running out of copy clicks. But we told them we would make them whole. So, we're not going to get kids to suffer because there was a budgetary issue. But those are two examples that come to mind where title will not allow for anything logos, anything administrative, right? So you couldn't go get an assistant principal, but under the pool you could. And under title you can't. So that's kind of stuff.
It sounds like it's an awareness issue as well.
Right.
It sounds like education.
I think the other part of it for this year specifically, so when you think holistically about Title I, one of the better, what you're really thinking about is strategy around improvement for your students that the funding is there to support. And so when you look back historically at how we've talked about this a lot, but when we look back historically at how we have spent Title I dollars, sometimes it's not necessary, you can't see as much of the strategy in that. So this year, I think where some of the questions came from, because we did give allowable expenses or purchases that you could do from Title I. But transparently, some of the questions came from positions that were recommended to go into Title I that go along directly with strategy for improvement. So the additional positions that were added, there were some schools that wanted those positions, and the data shows that they needed those positions, and there were some that did not. So I think that may be what some of those questions were through the budget process for this year. But again, looking at the data overall, the positions were recommended for those areas for improvement for the needs that are happening in the school buildings. And schools still have additional funds to do, some of the other ancillary things that they're looking to do in the building as well. So I think that was some of it.
Yeah. There are options or whatever. Any other questions? You good on grants, titles, and
Yeah, I always reserve my right to ask questions later. So
You're
I'll
welcome
come back.
to. Yeah. So if it pleases the chair, that's number 3 and number 6 were kind of duplicates, so we wanted to hold those. Can we go to number 4?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Before we do that, can I ask a question? So, back to number 2 with regard to annual appropriations. I have not been through this process before because we didn't have to do that last year. So would you just mind kind of giving some like the process and how appropriations work, and what would you be budgeting for that is allowable while we finalize the budget? Just as a new board member, and maybe the public too, but I don't know. So
we have to do this every year. It's a requirement.
okay.
So there's 2 appropriations resolutions that happen at the end of the year. One is to finalize. So the board authorizes me to spend money through the appropriations resolution.
Okay.
It's not the budget, it's the appropriations resolution, and it's a total by grant. So for this year, general fund was $613 million. So you gave me authority to spend $613 million. And I have to have that authority before I can run the first check of the year, payroll or vendor, okay? So in June, so you do that for each year. But in June, we have to do a final one for the year because the appropriation is all based on estimate. So it'll come up with a different number for this year to say this is how much money we think we need to finish out the year.
Okay.
At the same time, you do a new year appropriation based on what we recommend and submit as a budget. So it could be 588 million under normal circumstances, which is our budget target, right? Or it could be higher depending on which budget bill gets passed. But so typically, so in the past when we've had to do a temporary appropriation, I just took the total budget target divided by the number of days, multiplied it times 90 days and said, okay, that's my budget for the first 90 days of the year. The downside of that is everybody has to do all their contracts that have to start on July 1 can only be 90 days worth of expense. And that's really hard to predict accurately. And then they forget to amend them. And so then they get us into a then and now situation and delays happen. I can't pay the bills until the board approves it, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So all I'm suggesting is that instead of just doing 90 days, I might do a half a year to give us a little bit more freedom and room to maneuver.
Got it.
Did I answer all your questions?
You did.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll go forward and we'll also go back.
I'm sorry, one last thing. So throughout the year, you'll do an appropriations amendment resolution. We get a new grant. I can't spend that grant until you give me authority to spend it. So we have to amend the appropriation, but we'll only do it for the things that change. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Go to the internal chief. It's somebody chief.
Chief Audit Executive.
She's a chief too.
Well, thank
Too
you.
many chiefs, not enough Indians.
We got Indians, yeah.
Okay.
Well, very good. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Thank
morning.
you for inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited to share a few highlights. I'm going to keep things brief, but happy to expand upon request. So my plan for today's conversation is a look back at fiscal year 2023, the work that the Internal Audit Department accomplished in partnership with our audit committee, as well as a brief discussion about where we are headed for fiscal 2024. So a brief recap, each year the Internal Audit Department develops an internal audit plan. That is our assessment essentially of the district and saying where should internal audits spend their time in terms of highest priority, highest impact, and alignment to strategy. So this past year we completed 7 projects. 2 of the most notable projects were our security audit of our badging system in partnership with Superintendent Wright's teams. And our other most impactful audit, I believe, was our benefits follow-up audit, which we discussed at our May meeting. So those were our 2 largest projects, but we also worked in an advisory capacity. And as a recap for those who may not be familiar, advisory projects were an adaptation we've kind of developed over the years where internal audit can sit on a management-led team and provide independent consultation and advice while maintaining, as I mentioned, our independence. But it allows us to come into processes and projects on the early side of things to give our thoughts and to say if we were to come back, these are things we would expect or we would look for. So we've really appreciated the opportunity to partner with management over the last 3 or 4 years with projects of that type. And I think they've been very impactful and set us up for greater success as we do either come to audit or as management moves forward with those projects. Of course, as a reminder, assurance are our typical audits. So those security and benefits projects I mentioned before, those are the reports that you get, and those are more formal in nature. And then finally, we do some follow-up work. And again, benefits was a follow-up where we come back and see how things we've previously audited have turned out and progressed. So the reason I mentioned those 3 categories is as we think of this upcoming year, fiscal 2024, we're devising projects in each of those areas as well. So as we've spent the last 2 months, we have performed a very robust district-wide risk assessment. And so this is something really unique to the Internal Audit Department, and I think it's a great perspective and value add, if you will, that the department brings. We take essentially this large risk matrix and develop a risk score on a very wide variety of categories, things from financial impact and materiality all the way to reputational impact, organizational risk, strategic risk, kind of the thought of if something were to go wrong in this area, what would the impact on the district be? So if we feel things are going well in that area, perhaps not a place for internal audit to assist, but other areas, it helps us identify where a gap might be and where internal audit may be of assistance. So through our planning process this year, we really wanted to be even more collaborative than in years past. So we sent out planning surveys that asked questions that helped us fill out those categories around strategic risk or reputational risk. And we surveyed 61 members of the district's leadership, and we received an 80% response rate, which is phenomenal. So everyone was really collaborative and willing to give some input. We also spoke with ELT members and also reached out to the Council of Great City Schools to survey the other internal audit groups to see what projects they have been doing, things they found to be most impactful. And so with all of that said, we take all of that information, we analyze and say, where do we need to be spending our time this year? So I won't get ahead of myself, and I will spend, I don't want to be duplicative of our June 28th audit committee meeting, but we will bring the results of that risk assessment forth, as well as a proposal for the fiscal 2024 internal audit plan. The sense that we have this year is a little different. We have now, at this point, when we look at our risk assessment, we have audited those top 10, 20 things at this point, which is great news. And there's a lot of work still on the management side now to implement those recommendations. The one thing you will see come forth is, what is internal audit next? What's this next iteration? And our significant project that we will propose will be more involved at the school level, getting out to our school sites, as that's something internal audit has not historically done, evaluating things from financials, potentially academics. It's really a work in progress as to what we can evaluate, but we do have some great ideas that we look forward to sharing with the audit committee in the June 28th meeting. I will finally mention that we met with the audit committee chairs yesterday for a 3-hour planning session. We talked them through our entire risk assessment process. And we also talked through the next iteration of internal audit being more of an ERM type approach in terms of saying, what are those next level of risks now that we've hit the big things? What do we do next? So you'll see all of that as a more robust, put together presentation, if you will, at the June 28th meeting. And I really look forward to sharing that with you then. So I'm happy to answer any questions or expand where needed.
Questions? Sure.
Oh, not so much a question, but I mean, I want to say that, like, one of the things that we have seen in this last year with the internal audit committee is that there's been a benefit to us also having an opportunity to go back and do some of the follow-ups that you described as one of the reviews that we've done, because I think that is also something that, as a district, we do put together a lot of documentation of what we should do. The question always becomes, what did we do in response to that? So I think that's something I've really appreciated from internal audit. I think the other part to it is also this idea of the change of the internal audit work itself to be something that more looks at specific areas that kind of can grow into something greater is going to be that next level that gets us to be more efficient, that gets us to be more consistent from school to school, but from also as a district as a whole, because I think that's the one area that is probably the most concerning to me, is that I think we do have different operations at each school that operates at different levels of what they think should be done on this part or how this is done, and that some of those inconsistencies leads to results that results in central that may then trickle down to the school level. So for instance, I know we've done this with payroll is a great example, right? Where we've looked at payroll and looked at the processes in central, but then we also know that there's an aspect of payroll that's in each, there's an aspect of payroll that's in each building. And so how do we manage those systems also? How do we devise systems that would make sure they're able to do it in an effective way, to also make sure the central office payroll works in an effective way? And so those things, I think those are all great things that we're looking at and doing.
And if I may, you said that perfectly. That is the goal of these school projects. I really want this to be a collaborative approach, in the sense that we've looked at payroll centrally and we say this looks great on paper, but we all know the reality is so different at our school level. So I'm really, really looking forward to getting out and doing just what you said, Member Craig. We see in our school, make our recommendations better once we see those realistic aspects. So that's our next iteration. I just think you said it wonderfully.
Well, I was going to suggest that the school piece was super significant, and you did say that very well. So thank you for sure. I also, and I'm looking forward to having your information to be more efficient as a district. Have you done an audit on transportation?
We have back in fiscal 2019, and it was focused on the financial operations.
Okay.
So I just shared that again with our director of transportation, as he said, you know, we might be ready for another audit, or I welcome one, which is always great news. But I did remind him, you know, have the things in that original audit been fully addressed? And he kind of said, you know, actually, now that I look back, there's still a lot of work we need to do in documenting and fine tuning our financial processes.
Sure.
So I reminded him, we're ready to go. We're ready to hop in where needed and when called upon. So I think those recommendations still hold true.
I was wondering that because I think that we've got some areas that just concern me. And just for the public's knowledge, you are a direct report to the board, so it's not as, you know, you could give us a very objective opinion about what you see, which I think is wonderful. But I'm very interested in specifically, if an audit is done, thank you, 2019 is great, but then how do you go back and track how the suggestions have been implemented, because that's part of the problem. Doing the work is great, but if there's no follow through or there's minimal follow through, maybe that's something that we need to take a look at as a board to say, hey, we've spent a significant amount of time and resources and you and your team performing the work, how we need to hold the other departments accountable on getting that work done. So do you keep that information?
You were just hitting all the things I'm on the list. This is perfect. And so in the past, this time every year, we go through and we do an update of all outstanding past audit recommendations to say, management, let us know where they stand. Do you need additional resources? Is this recommendation no longer relevant? We'll close it out if we are in agreement. Or have you completed and implemented the recommendation? We are now realizing this year, since we have done 8 years of this, those outstanding recommendations, or just recommendations that have been made in total, are quite a lengthy list. So one of the projects we want to do this year is automating that follow-up into a quarterly blast out to all of our folks with outstanding recommendations and keeping a pulse. So when we report to the finance board or audit committee, we have a dashboard that says, here's our percentage of completion, here's those that have been in progress, and then also aging them to say, we have a fiscal 17 still sitting out there. So yes, we do that every year, but things that we want to do a more involved and more continuous update. And that's something we plan to include in our audit plan this year as well.
Okay, that's great. Because we've got, you know, I was just thinking when you talked about the projects, security benefits are great, but we've got transportation, we've got IT, we've got, you know, some other areas that probably need a good look at too, so that we can kind of make some decisions. So I just was wondering about that, and I'm happy to support. So that's it for me.
Thanks. A couple of things as well, if I can recall, particularly 2 audits, because I was sitting when it was delivered, and I think I was sitting next to Superintendent Mitchell when you released a kind of an audit on A to E, A to S, and something about the number of students and the number of staff and whatever. I mean, it was pretty alarming as to the commitment in resources.
Virtual high school.
If I may, it might be the Cincinnati Digital Academy and then the virtual high school. Okay.
Something, and maybe it wasn't full audit.
Okay.
But yes, see, all that, the virtual, that was a nightmare too. But the point is, the good doctor's position, if it gets read into our budget, if we actually take action on it, then that's what we need to be able to do. So I think that's good. And transportation one, I was there for that one, and that was alarming. But let me ask this, those things that you recommended in 19 did not happen, or did they partially happen during a particular couple of years and then not again?
I can start with my perspective, and then I'm eyeing the superintendent here. She may be able to build upon as she's more attuned to the current state. So at the time, there was good progress put in place in terms of an action plan with management at the time, correlating recommendations to what steps they would take. so on and so forth. I think, of course, that was interrupted at the time and then changes with management. So we met with the new director of transportation and, of course, our new COO upon their start, went through in great detail, and actually with Ms. Fuqua, when she was still here as well, to kind of bridge everyone. We tried to put everyone around the table to reiterate that initial audit and said, this is something that still holds true, and we still will follow up on those recommendations. So that's been the point that we've kind of left things at. We've checked in with Chris Burkhart throughout the year to say when is the right time for us to get involved if that's appropriate. And I believe they've been kind of in flux with their financial employee, if you will, to own those processes. And that's where I may turn over to Superintendent Wright.
I think all accurate. When I transitioned, we actually reviewed all of the current, I say fairly current, I think we may have gone back to about 2016 for the audits that had been done, and transportation was one of the audits. I think the corrective action, but there were quite a bit of changes in transportation prior to May that were already occurring. So there was not, it wasn't stable. It wasn't stable. And so, a part of the corrective action was most recently an individual that was placed in the role last year, I believe that it was, or now last year, year before, the year before, before I came, to serve as, to monitor the financial piece. Transition that person this year, so but that person was not connected to the treasurer's office, and nor did the treasurer's office have any involvement, oversight, that kind of thing. So this year, which is also responsive to one of the questions in the list of questions, this year that person is no longer with us as of I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe December, because of a lot of the information that was determined at that point. So when there could be an opportunity for transition, that opportunity was taken. Since then, we have actually and are vetting to not just have the plan, but to monitor the use of it, the very specific guidance that step by step, because that had really not been created. The step-by-step guidance for the review of the collection of the invoices, the review of the invoices, the process to identify areas that are inaccurate in the invoices, and the area to update. So a lot of this year, and this is, I heard a bit of this conversation earlier, there has been a lot of progress toward trying to start the school year with a cleaner slate, because each year invoices have popped up from previous years. And so, and even from budget, when we think about how we budgeted for transportation previously, we didn't have enough in the budget to start with. And so what the budget is there, but then there were, I think, 3 or 4 amendments to that budget that took us over, $51 million as a part of it. So I think the $48 million that we're recommending this year is a decrease from that, but it looks like an increase because the initial budget from FY23 was so much lower. Right, was so much lower. Correct. So I think to Lauren's point, I think we're at the point now, and the cadence that we're on is kind of that whole bi-monthly thing as well, of going in to then spot check what's happening with those invoices, because I think that, and currently the team is going back through all of the previous invoices because, and this is what Mike was talking about as well, because we have found errors where, we've been billed for, and in some instances, we're confirming the invoices at how we've been billed so that we're not overpaying.
Starting with sort of a clean slate, or having paid everything we're supposed to pay, and actually just looking to 1 year without all that additional, I think would be a big. If we could we go to this, maybe I'm out of order here, but I get to do that. Let's do this wonderful page on transportation payments. And I have a couple of questions before I turn it over to the committee. I'm not sure under what category the health checks and vision tests And I know we've gotten a memo from the people that take care of that, especially the vision dental people, of what they would need regarding buses for their service.
I have no idea. I don't know what you're talking about.
So I'm just saying we need to be thinking about that, because that's the
Say-
thing that suffered the
Say it
most.
again.
It's the health checks, vision checks, dental checks for our students. Something we've worked hard to have that happen during the school day. And over the last couple of years, they've not been able to be at full force. Further, they actually were more successful during COVID than they were this year to the year before. So I think transportation, or somebody received a memo about what they need, which is really quite minimal to get back to where we were once these kids have consent and they can go vision, dental, and the health checks.
So who owns the work for CPS? The coordination of these health checks?
Right now, I think it's probably who's ever organizing the buses for field trips, so it might be Popejoy that has a relationship with the vision people and the dental people.
So we don't have an administrator that helps coordinate these activities. I'm not talking about transportation.
Yeah, we've had it for years and years and years. It went through transportation, so I'm just saying I didn't see that category. I didn't know it was included in others.
I don't know.
But we would do thousands of kids a year.
I understand, but it used to be Pam Thomas used to organize that work for us.
I had no idea.
So,
You'd have to find out.
yeah, we don't know. All right, we'll follow up on it.
Because when we start the year, we're going to our.
They probably use the
Bus effort.
dedicated buses because it was during the
Maybe,
day.
Maybe not.
So-
I don't know. I'm not getting the lead.
So Wendy is new to the role that she's in. That was a role that we added just this year because we did not anticipate that we would have the challenges that we had with buses. So we were anticipating that we would, be able to have field trips during the day and all of that, and having one person to own that. So she went into that role late during this school year. The plan for next year. So I can't speak to because of the challenges that we had this year with transportation. Period. I don't know that there was really an availability of buses to transport the students, and that's just a transparent statement. That's correct. But next year, which is one of the reasons that I kind of update each time I talk about the dedicated buses. It's not just about athletics. It's dedicated buses for activities. So during the day, those buses would then be used and able to be utilized for the planning and coordination of students that need to go to the health centers as well. And so currently but the health centers are the ones that keep the data on it in terms of the actual individuals they're seeing. So that's not data that we actually see. So we can do the follow-up with that because it was coordinated through transportation, but I don't think there were buses available for the transport this
The
year.
last couple of years, I think, and they don't need full buses. It's a smaller kind of thing, but I think that'd be great just to make sure that is part of our function, because that is something we're so proud of. And I would also say on the enhancement and enrichment, that seems low too. I would hope that we would be.
So let me explain the spreadsheet. So, and the superintendent hasn't seen this yet. The superintendent hasn't seen this yet. I just did this morning. And so I just wanted to ask for grace for that. So what I did is I went into the financial system and ran payments from July 1 to today, all funds. So using ESSER and general fund or title, whatever. So, and then I've organized it by object code, which is down the left column, which tells you what it is, whether it's salary or service or mileage or office supplies. The function is the purpose. So, for example, students with disabilities, the way they coded the bills looks like we spent $16 million transporting students with disabilities. I don't know if that's just CPS students or if it's all non-public and charter. I don't know. Transportation for regular aid students is $37 million. Enrichment and
Just yellow, or is that also?
this is both.
Okay, good.
It's regular ed students, no matter who the vendor is.
Right.
Okay. Community school transportation, 2.3 million. Non-public, 3.3. I don't know what other means. That could be part of the other. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. So in a nutshell, we paid $64 million worth of invoices from July 1st of 2022 to today. Having said that, we carried over 11 million of prior encumbrances. So some of that 64 was actually incurred last year, just not billed or paid out until this year. So if you subtract that out, we paid $52.5 million this year. And there's still $2 million in open encumbrances as of today. So we don't know if we've received all the invoices for the year yet for every vendor. And the salary, we have one more payroll to run. So
Well, this is that whole breakdown thing that we've been talking about. And this is much more broken down even than the really good breakdowns we would get several years ago, because of the reality, because you've done it this way. And however that works, then how does this information now impact your budget plan for transportation?
So this data is only as accurate as the way they break the invoices down, right?
Right.
The transportation staff codes it, right? So we'll say that. I know that the chief operating officer, Chris, has worked very hard in building the budget on a per pupil basis, moving upward. I don't have any access to that information or that level of detail information or the calculations they were using. I don't know if you have, can you shed any light on that?
I'm not sure.
She wants to know how we're using this information to build fiscal year 24's budget. And I'm saying we're not necessarily using this. What they're doing is getting a per pupil price for the service they're being charged and trying to build from there. Because this budget and previous budgets have been, oh, we spent 40 million last year, let's do 40 million next year, whether regardless of how accurate that was or not. I also know that
Let's spend 37 million. Yeah.
whichever, I'm making numbers up, but I know that two directors before, when they ran out of money, they just held invoices until the new year, so they wouldn't have to ask for a budget increase. And that's just
very well aware.
particular, right? Particular issue. So I thought we resolved that, but so I can't specifically attest to how they built the transportation budget this year, but I do know philosophically they were trying to use student service costs and build it from the ground up.
Correct. And what I don't know is the actual, what the dollar figure for that is. So there were two pieces that were included in it. The per student, so the transportation needs by the individual students, one, and then taking into consideration looking at the historical information for students and changes that come up and trying to project what those changes may be as well. That was the second. And then the third was looking at how we did budget in the previous years and really intimately looking at last year in terms of making sure that as we're budgeting in each of the areas, we're doing that budget with anticipation of increase and looking at the increase in costs that we know that we're already receiving as well, for like fuel, for example. Sure. Fuel is one that we were notified, last year that it would be going up this year. And so we're including that in the building of the budget to start with. We're also including, we have our contracts, so we know what our contracts are, but this year we contracted for buses, we didn't contract for vans. And so as we think about what needed to happen in order for us to transport our students, not having that piece there next year, but having some level of contingency that's built into the budget. So if it does come up that we need to go even deeper with that. So there's been really a pretty good analysis of what the challenges are, getting into those challenges, and then doing the projections for the budget for this year.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think this speaks a little bit to the difficulty in the budget process as well as kind of the appropriations assessment, right? Because what we're looking at here is that we have, and Jen said 11, but it's really 12 or nearly $12 million
Correct.
Of funds that should have been expended the previous year, should have been part of whatever we looked at as we were building a budget, that we're not, or for the most part, we're not. And so that puts a difficulty then when you come back and say, what does this cost us this year?
The budget follows the encumbrance. So
Yeah.
if you budget it in fiscal year 23, and we still have $2 million at the end of this year, that budget will get added to the budget for fiscal year 24 to make it, so if it's 50 and 2, it'll be 52 million as a working budget.
Which, you know, in theory, does not actually explain away what our actual cost of services would be, right?
Right.
And so I think that in some ways is why it is very difficult, is because the example you gave, which somebody's saying, okay, well, we spent 40 million, so it looks like that's what we need for next year, may not be an accurate way of determining what services are needed. I think the additional part that I think we all are dealing with is this is actually the first year that we've really been, kids are in school the full year with no kind of disruption from COVID in that same sense. And so there are a lot of differences in how folks operate now, where kids are going to school, a little process that we are hopefully going to be able to start to be able to figure out if they follow the historic trends or if there are new trend that's been created. Because I know a number of folks whose kids go different paths and do different things because they changed and adjusted during COVID and did not go back to how they would have done it before. And so I think this is really good information for us to be able to see this and I understand it. I think it's also will be interesting to see as we get through the process how much next year this looks different.
Right. I think the one of the questions that was asked was, you know, where we go next with thinking about savings for transportation. And with the plan that we have, we really have to monitor that through the first quarter of the year. That would be our goal, to monitor the first quarter of the year and then do the comparisons for that around the first quarter of the year. But really where we are right now, we believe that there are three major things that would need to happen in order for us to truly have a greater impact on a reduction in transportation. One, and I don't know that they're the things that we want to do moving forward, but one is changing the walk distance, because that changes the number of buses that we need. And I believe that I understand that there's not an appetite for that, but that's one of the answers to that question. The second is to explore electric buses. However, electric buses are more to start with because it also requires additional setup, additional location for us to be able to even think about electric buses. So that's going to give us an increase first. But after about that first 90 days, we could have a cost analysis done for us on what the differences would be and how long it would take for us to actualize the savings from that. The third is we transport everyone, right? And we are not required to transport everyone. There is not a desire for us not to transport everyone, but that's what we do right now. So I think in terms of cost savings, you know, we are being as fiscally sound, I think, right now as we can. And it's just going to take something that we continue to monitor, because we've not really had the best data to start with in thinking about the budgeting process when we're budgeting, you know, $13 million less than what we actually need. And so I think that's just something for us to continue to think about.
So I'll be very brief, but as a person who has to kind of look at, as one of 7 who has to kind of look at the budget and ask questions and be ultimately voting for or against, I would love to see cost savings that included a variety of options. Some of the ones the superintendent did explain, but I also think that we're not exploring enough. We've got partnerships that we could potentially utilize. We've got some, I like the electric bus idea, but if we were to maintain, if the goal is to maintain what we have, how can we be creative with that? How can we still maintain our walking distance, use what we have with limited resources, and still give our students the high quality that they've come accustomed to, and we just need to get it right. So my comment though is, we can't just look at that number. And I think maybe we've been just doing that, just looking at the 64 million and saying, okay, well, that's the budget for the next year. It's in the disaggregation of it that you explained, you know, it's really 52.5 million for this year because 11 is coming over. Is it possible to come up with a very realistic number of what it should be? I understand the per student number or attempt, but we should know what our number for transportation is, even if there's a carryover, we should be able to say it's 52.5 plus the 2.5 for this number, and then budget accordingly. I'm all for this, the per student, because I want to look at it that way. But I also don't, again, as one person who has to vote for or against, I don't want to have to come back and say, hey, we need another 10 million. Hey, we need another 12 million or 20 million at the end of the year because this didn't happen. That to me is, in with full respect of the people that are doing the work, that shows that there's something wrong that we can't come up with, or maybe there's a process that we need to come up with that gives us an accurate number. I can see having to ask for maybe 10%, but when you ask for 20 million, that's a huge number. 5 million maybe.
Superintendent's going to address that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me finish my sentence. So I just want us to come up with a very accurate, as close as possible, plus or minus a little bit of a number that's realistic. And I think we can do that if we were to be honest and disaggregate the data, because you just told us.
I think that's what Chris is doing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think
That's helpful.
That's what I was trying to clarify in the statement that I made, because it appeared that we are just building a budget based on a per student allocation, and we're not.
Right.
So what we've done, we actually have a number, and that number is the number that's requested in our budget for this year that takes in all of those factors, as well as which also include the number of routes that we have, how many times we have to run those routes, any additional changes that may come up. So it's all three of those things that I referenced, but that's how we have that number. So, and building into that, however, some level of contingency, a small estimate of contingency for the things that come up that you're also trying to prepare for because of what the past data tells us. So that is the number that we have, and that's the number that's requested in the budget.
I would add, I think the division's making good headway on finding ways to justify changing service in some way, shape, or form. And I think, yeah, there's some partnerships it's maybe massage says there are different people in charge, not of the folks that are running the buses, but the people that control who are those people. But the biggest opportunity I should say, one of the biggest opportunities for changing this transportation budget is coming out of ad hoc. And ad hoc needs to have the priority
I think
that
so.
it needs to have. And I think there's a hesitancy, not on the part of the administration, but we've been very pleased that both the superintendent and the treasurer have been coming to those meetings. But and that's it cannot wait 3 years. We will be broke if we wait 3 years to make some of those fixes. So I mean, that's the best opportunity because the cost of choice has been too great. And we did it to survive, I guess. They did it to make sure that, I don't know, people stayed in the district and we could grow a district or whatever. We can't afford it anymore, and we have better programming and better options now than we did before, and we're going to get better and better ones. So we can do this. So I mean, there's millions to be saved if we can do ad hoc properly and have a product that people want. I mean, it's just amazing what we can do. And I think from a safety standpoint, from a community standpoint, going all the way back, I'm on my soapbox, but going all the way back almost 10 years now when they did a study of youth, especially teenagers in Cincinnati, the biggest problem that children and teenagers they thought they had a bright future, but they had no sense of belonging. And I totally blame us for that. Because we just threw kids everywhere and they went everywhere, and their lack of, and that's even greater now in the post-COVID experience. So the ad hoc has to have a major priority effort, because there's where we're going to find some savings for it.
So two comments on that. One is the citywide choice has more of an exponential cost because we have to offer citywide service to our non-public and charter school friends. So we can't limit by attendance boundaries there. That's one. So two, my understanding of the timeline for ad hoc is that the report or the project plan will be done by December. Is that correct?
ad hoc is going to sunset, Madam Chair, is this correct? We're thinking in terms of our membership. We wanted to make sure that as long as we had Ms. Jones with us, but we're supposedly having some kind of a preliminary report in
By August.
Okay, so that'll help feed the next budget cycle. That's what I'm
Yes.
looking for.
Gotcha.
Got it.
The other piece, and I actually wrote this down, and so I'm glad that you shared that, because also a greater concern, and I don't know if I think we're talking about this in ad hoc, but I don't know if it's going to be a part of any of the recommendations or not. But a greater concern, other than our elementary students, is the drain that we have for transportation for our high school students, our 7th and 8th grade students that are going all over the district for high school. And so we understand how we got there, but that is also having a huge impact on us as well, because because it is, and I know that that's not as popular, but that is one that is causing a challenge for us. So it's something that we, as we're thinking, it's something really we're going to need to think about addressing as well.
And I think that's a return to the woods metro piece, but also I think the huge big concept too that's evolved from ad hoc makes some big changes. Middle school. Or indeed, that kind of geographic arrangement can be very helpful if we can.
Yep.
But again, we have to be able to market it, and we have to be able to have a product that's worth marketing. So this is really exciting.
What'd you say?
And phasing it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say,
Not just
Can't-
There we
one
go.
time.
There's a lot of grants
right.
going to take place, so you're not going to as quickly as you want, but that's the only way to get it so that it is accepted.
And we missed you in our last meeting because your piece, Jeremy gave us the great maps, and we talked about it as a concept for a neighborhood, not really the whole corridor, but what was missing was the budget piece for staff and transportation. And that's the other part that makes sense to talk about. We can talk about boundaries, but what is the realization of the cost savings, and what does that look like? And so that kind of is the next iteration of ad hoc in middle schools, because transport, we don't want it to cost more. We don't want it to, we're just talking about it right now in ideation. But
And do say too, consolidation of schools,
Mhm.
no closing of schools.
That's right.
Consolidation of schools has to happen as well, so. Sir,
I just want to add one quick thought on that as well. And I know we talked about this in my first year on the board with student achievement. But the idea that we have to be, and I appreciate the fact that ad hoc, this is part of ad hoc's process, was to do the programming review. Because I think a large part of what drives a lot of our transportation issues at the high school level happens also to coincide with what programs are offered where and what resources are offered where. And so, we've heard this in some of the conversations that we heard from parents, and this idea of the quality of resource that they view. So some of it's reputational, right? So we know that some things that people just don't do it because they've always not done it, and we as the district have to fix that. But I think a large part of the high school part is this question of what can my student do where? What programs will I see? We saw this during our conversations on the goals and guardrails. Is that folks were asking about, well, can we get this program at our school? Because we really would love to have our kid over here, but they don't have X. And I think that's to the point, one of the things the superintendent's talked about, I think you guys talked about it in ad hoc. I think it's something we're having as a bigger conversation in the district. But it is something that we'll have to take time to get to. Like, we didn't get there overnight. We won't get through it overnight. And so I think that might be something, again, another area for that, as we're doing it and as we're doing those transitions, that might be an area where internal audit can also be helpful in assessing where we have seen the programming grow, like growth in programs or growth in different resources that are something that might attract folks to particular schools. Because I know, for instance, Montessori has been a big draw to people coming back into the district. But the Montessori high school picture has a very different picture for folks. And so people have very different opinions of like the schools themselves. And so I think that's something we have to figure out. How do we fix that? How do we address those type of things as well?
marketing.
Okay. All right, let's, if we could, on the agenda, one reference, this is just sort of an announcement regarding Metro expectations. That I think Ms. Davis is putting that list together from board members to send to the administration as for the addendum or what have you. And I think the superintendent mentioned, I would assume some of that's the Metro 7th and 8th grade kind of piece. As our 7th and 8th graders going to high schools everywhere, and some of them were yellow bus, some were Metro, some whatever. But did you want to expound a little bit more about the 7th and 8th grade challenge? Is it because of our, we do the 7 through 12 instead of 9 through 12? Tell me why.
Right. So 7th and 8th grade, the majority of our 7th and 8th grade students are on yellow buses now. And so them being on yellow buses and going all over the district is where that challenge is. Moving into next school year, we do still plan to offer the option for families, for 7th and 8th grade families that have, that if they prefer to ride Metro, we do still plan to offer that option to them for next year because of the challenges that we had this year. And so there are some that have already said that they would like to remain on Metro, but the statement for transportation as a part of the larger ad hoc conversation was about the fact that open enrollment, allows our students to just go all over the district, which, sends buses to the many buses to the same neighborhoods going in different directions.
Other comments about the Metro expectations? Everybody knows that it's due to the list.
Yep.
If we would then, as we get ready to get into our last number of minutes, did you want to go through some of these questions? Did you have something the two of you wanted to share any more about budget? How did we want to proceed?
I thought you wanted to review these questions
That would
and
be
then,
great.
okay, so making sure that we're answering them to your clarity. The first question, there was a comment about some confusion about school budgets, and I'm not sure what the confusion is at this point.
Yeah, I think so. It seems to me, and again, you hear hodgepodge kind of stuff and only partial, but there seems to be still some confusion and communication internally about what was decided and what wasn't decided, and whether they're not accessing the whatever that software is or that platform is. Can you?
Allaview.
Yeah.
We're talking about,
I'm talking about school sites being confused about what is and what isn't.
I think at this point, we would really need to know what schools. And the reason that I say that is because all of the information that we have, everything that was approved prior to us, when we ended the pause, with the support that we got from the board, all schools were notified. There were conversations with schools that still had questions. Those questions were addressed. And so at this point, in order for us to offer support for schools that are still confused, we would need to know which schools are. This week, now I know what you're talking about when you said interview. So this week, we've been in Principals Academy for 2 days. We've had no budget questions. Yesterday, I started closing of school year conversations with principals. I think that's what you're talking about. And I'm doing every principal between now and next Thursday. And so I probably saw 20 principals yesterday. No budget questions. I have another group set up today that starts at 12:45. And so if there are questions in the field that are still needing to be addressed, then we really would need to know where they're coming from so that we can address those questions, because everyone's been notified, everyone's going to receive their information. They all have anything that was approved for them, anything that went through the appeals process. There were a couple other things that came up after the appeals process. We addressed those, made sure that we got clarification after the meeting that was with the LSDMCs. There were a few questions that came from that. We addressed those as well individually with those leaders. So that would be the best way for us to provide support, because we've given it all the information we have.
If there's still some confusion, who else could they reach out to? Is it whom do the principals report regarding budget?
The person that's been working on the appeals process has been the chief of staff. So he is the keeper of all of the information. He has all the repository so that we get one person that it goes through as the contact between anything, any decisions that we make, what gets back to budget. Therefore, it's not coming from a lot of different places
No, I think
so
that's
that we're
wonderful.
able to monitor that.
So that's where they should reach out and to find out whatever it is that they still are confused about.
Or directly to me, because if they're still confused,
Great.
we want to make sure that they're not.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I think that, let me, and I'll just speak for myself, not for people on the board. I am still a little confused. So I asked a question about the unrepresented in my email to you because it was like the unrepresented athletic coordinator. I think that was just one of many unrepresented positions that were sent to us for approval at the meeting. And I didn't understand where that aligned with regard to the organizational chart and just what that was replacing. So I don't know if my concern is not that principals are asking questions. People are saying, where do I fit? If I can't answer that question, then I ask the question. And so I didn't know, and that's why I asked, hey, where does this unrepresented, and I sent you the example with regard to athletic, it's an unrepresented athletic coordinator. I don't know where that fits. And so that's just one example. We talked about this a very lengthy period of time, so I get it, but I don't quite understand how that fits with where we agreed to. And so I send my questions and I ask those. And so I don't know if it's at the school level. I don't know. I'm not going to tell one school to call you or to call the chief of staff. I don't want that, but I'd like to be able to answer those questions with confidence, and I can't do that.
So I responded to your question, and there was the unrepresented positions go back to the school community coordinators
Okay.
and the assistant school community coordinators that we know we were removing. In some of those positions, we discussed that the alignment for the positions that were not being removed, the job descriptions for them were being updated,
Right.
and those job descriptions were updated. And we had to bring them back to the board for approval because of that.
Okay.
And so that's what those positions were.
Okay. So they're really the school community coordinators that we kind of authorized
That's correct.
as a board.
So the school community coordinator positions, one of the challenges with the school community coordinator positions and the assistant school community coordinator positions is that their jobs that they were doing did not fit what it was that they were actually doing at the school building.
Right.
So that was the initial issue. So we removed the positions across the board. We brought back a few of them in terms of those specific positions. One of them was ELL. We talked about there were some that are supporting our Aspire program, and so they were in those roles. So those positions still have to be at that level, but the job descriptions were updated. So we brought them back as unrepresented because they were unrepresented before.
Okay. So career tech, did we get rid of those positions?
We did.
Okay. And the
career tech position that we have removed, which was a school community coordinator position or assistant, I think a school community coordinator instead of assistant. We removed those because that work that was the whole discussion around the additional graduation, the person that would support graduation, the counselor for graduation. And so that body of work is moving to that role that was approved.
in the APs of culture are 1 year out of ESSER?
Right now, they're out of ESSER, yes.
Okay.
And they report to the principals. All APs report to the principal.
Okay. All right, we got it on record.
All right, so good segue, because the next question is what positions are funded in ESSER? So the Promise Center has 26.4 FTEs. That includes teacher, principal, whatever is in the building. The 11,
Results.
I'm sorry?
We have like results.
So we do have data on the Promise Center. The director that's at the Promise Center actually keeps really good data for what's happening in the school. The challenge is the Promise Center is severely underutilized on a daily basis. They might have 150 students, if that. So when you look at the number of FTEs that they have and the number of students that they have on any given day, it's severely underutilized. And if you talk to the school, they would believe that they may need more resourcing, but there is already a challenge in terms of we have been thinking about, and we did some work prior to, and I did share this with the board, we were having some conversation earlier, had met with the director at the school to really look at how we might think about doing things differently there. And so she and I had discussion there, and she gave a proposal for what that could look like, but it involved moving to another location. And at that time, which, you know, this was to our thought, the location that we were looking to move to, because of where it was, and it was centrally located, and it had a separate entrance, and we were going to be able to put up a door and all of those kinds of things, we thought that would be a good use of that space. So much happened at that school that this wasn't the time to try to transition. So I am in full support of thinking differently about the Promise Center and how we utilize the Promise Center, and co-locating if possible. I do think we need it as a service, but where we are now, where it is now, where the location, and we're just not servicing enough students, and they are doing very positive work with the students that go to the Promise Center, but just not enough students go. So we're also looking on the other side of that. Yeah.
But there's a revised code for it.
But we're also looking at the other side of that, though, through the code of conduct, because as students are placed there are some students that should be required to attend before they're able to go back to their school building, or look at other options that are not face-to-face. And so that is something that we have to buy into. Our schools deserve that. Our leaders deserve it. And it's supportive for the students because it's about trying to get restoration for them. But if we don't put practices in place that say you have to do this, if this happens, you have to do this before you can just show back up in your school, they never get the benefit of the restoration and the service.
But changing Promise Center is not going to be possible necessarily for this.
Unless I can get some recommendations on where we locate. Because I'm open to movement, and I think the school is open to movement. Going to a different location, I think all of that is possible. All of that is possible. This is a lot of staffing, but they also serve a large population of students, a large range in terms of grades. And so because
but one of the things that the public never quite knows is how young kids and grown kids are co-located in the same place. So I mean, Promise Center could be split. I always wait for the public to figure this out, that grade school kids are involved with this.
Yeah, they start at 4th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go 4 through 12 would, I think, concern the public.
Well, and even with that, we still are only having about 150 students that are there, each day. And it's also, and the location is also not as conducive, in terms of that as well. So I am definitely open to location, to space, even if there was an office location that, we threw around some different ideas of a different space that we may be able to partner with to put the program in. But that hasn't come to fruition. But we're definitely open and know that more needs to happen in terms of, more needs to happen there, and we need to not be in Jacobs.
So I just want to make sure that this is, because you're grilling the poor superintendent on this one, but there is an Ohio revised. But there's an Ohio revised code that says that we have to have a separate location, first of all. So I get that you're concerned about it. third grade or kindergarten, whatever grade they start at to high school, if the state says that we have to have a safer facility, we need to do that. Part of the problem is the location. I've known more than a handful of parents that have had children that have had to go over there for whatever the reason, and they've refused to send them. So I'm interested in the data of how many are assigned to go but don't go, and versus how many are actually attend, because there are some students who are, removed from school and said, I have to go. But if you're only seeing 150, but you're supposed to see 300, that's a difference as well. And also the data on when they're there, what they're doing, that's effectiveness of the programming. But then are those things implemented when they come back to school? And I know that the superintendent has been looking at that. I've asked about that question, and her and I have had a conversation about it, because the data is being collected. I don't know if systemically it's being looked at or supported from our level in totality, but I know that the location and parents sending their kids there that are supposed to be there is a concern.
I am open to any suggestions for where it could be co-located, because we have to have a location. It doesn't have to be an individual location. So it can be co-located somewhere else that we put up a couple walls. But in terms of thinking about the conversations that we've had around ad hoc, I've been apprehensive to recommend some of the other spaces because of the conversations that we've had. But definitely open and willing to have other discussion about it, because I do think it's important.
But what happens after next year? Because they're in ESSER. So we have to have these conversations soon, because how do we fund that next year? And it's what, $2 million, $3 million?
I think that we are going to have to look at the overall model completely for it. I love the experiences that I've had, honestly, and having had the experience of having to develop a high school alternative program and a middle school alternative program. The way that we are looking at staffing, the way that we are looking at support services, we're trying to do some of that work in an ALC model in the school buildings, but there's more work and support for us to do there. So I think it's really looking at a kind of a comprehensive, overhaul of what that looks like. We have, I know we haven't gotten to the position level yet, but one of the things that we've tentatively added, and hopefully it's one that we're going to be able to keep as we go through the budget, but it is a person to do just that in terms of support. Because what happens is a lot of times, because the Promise Center is doing good work with the students, but when the students go back to their home school, there isn't really anyone to shepherd them. So at the high schools, that will become the assistant principal of culture to then make sure that they are, I don't want to use they are re-engaging the students and the families. Schools are really trying to do it now. They have the re-entry meetings with them, but who's then monitoring those students? Because you also don't know, I think the data that I've also have begun to ask about is how many students are repeat going back to the Promise Center. And so where do we get? So there's a lot to be really discussed in that space.
Plus, we have 20-some school-based health centers.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
So if I could, this may be the place to talk about this a little bit in terms of nursing. So the one challenge that's caused, so we're looking at a couple different things in terms of recommending even how we might further be able to reduce this contract even for this year. it is, I don't know how it's sustainable in any school district to maintain a nurse, even in a planning process, a actual RN in every school building. And so when you think about it, most places that have nursing services, it's done in some kind of a cohort model. You look at LPNs and you look at home health aides, because individuals in terms of services for what we need outside of our students that have the most severe needs, what those students need and what they're doing in the buildings does not require that level of specificity. And so one of the things that was raised with the health centers is any student that uses the health center has to have a permission slip to use it. And not all of our students have permission slips. So I think one of the answers there is to continue to do a real push at the beginning of the year at those locations, and you know, what the billing part of that looks like as well, to try to add that to the equation for how we reduce some of this, because there's still other ways for us to look at reduction, even going into next school year. So the team is working on some different models that we may be able to come back and look at. Met with the health department earlier this week. There's another meeting with them next Thursday so that we can also continue to have some conversation.
There's also the whole cohort of telehealth.
That's right.
And with the telehealth, and if you do it with the close part of the proximity,
Mm-hmm.
if you know, you have these what would you call them, little networks within our district, especially built around the school-based health centers, because they're spread throughout pretty well. And so I think at the height of COVID, it was important for us to say there's a nurse in every building.
Right.
And I think there has to be health care in every building in some way, shape, or form. So I think that would be useful.
I think maybe to that model also, thinking about the number of students that, like, even if you did something like a regional network of whatever, think about the number of students who use those services on a regular basis as well as a way to model that. Because, you know, if, again, for instance, you have a school that has a large number of students, maybe there is a need at a school that has, you know, 1,000, 1,500 students who will all utilize these services. At a school where there's 200, a school where there's 350, 400, being able to collectively do that.
Right. And some of what we're paying for right now is an RN. You know, the RNs have to get their orders from the doctor. They can only communicate at the doctor level, which is fine. But we have several RNs that are working in schools that are able to, that are doing that. If we had an RN that we hired for the district, that person could do that same role and it would not require the numbers that we have. So there's a lot of ways to work through this. And I think it's even as early as this year, looking at some additional ways to do some cuts, some reductions here.
Yes.
I started asking this question because we talked about this in our financial town hall around initially last year having to, the $8 million was the proposed number, and then having to make a decision, general fund or get rid of that. But I also think that there's, you know, maybe even expanding away from the city and doing some other creative things like you mentioned is the option, and I'm all for that. But one of the things that concerns me is the unit, we've got some specialized units within our district, and we have some students that are not on a specialized unit. Well, for instance, autism, we have some autism units, but we also have students who have medical need and necessity, but they are prevented from coming to school if the medical personnel is not on site. Let me give you an example, like a person who's diabetic. And so I'm concerned that we are minimally able to maintain what we need so that the students can come to school. Because if we don't have, whether it be an LPN or an RN on site for the number of students that just need the person to be on site, then they can't come to school. And I know, because I know a few parents that have reached out and stated that their kids couldn't come to school because they didn't have the medical, we didn't have the medical professionals on site. And so that's where my drive around the nurses piece comes from, because I want us to If it's with the city, it's not, then it's not. Let's be creative on that because we have the latitude to have LPNs in place rather than RNs. But for those students that we absolutely, it's a medical necessity, I want to make sure that we're being able to cover that. And so that was the reason behind a lot of my questions. How many of those students on average, how many students are missing, how many students there are, and then how many days are students missing school, and making sure that we have a contract in place to cover them minimally. And that's why I was asking, like, what is that number that we would need? I know 8 million is for everybody to be in full compliance everywhere, but what is the minimum number that we would need in order to make certain that kids are coming to school that have to, and then we have a skeletal crew with the latitude that you're sharing? What is that number? Is it 8 million? Is it 5 million? Like, what is it?
And that's what we're cross-referencing now
Okay.
to that point. Because some of this was a new learning, that is the way that we have done that service for the students in the district, that if there were students that had a specific medical need, and most of them in that situation are students that are a certain level of diabetic. And there are a few of those cases have actually rose to me this year, and that's kind of how I really knew, what was happening in that space.
Right.
And so that is what we're digging into, because in a lot of it, to Board Member Craig's point, in a lot of areas, what you do is you're looking at where the concentration of students are, so that you're making sure that you have personnel in those locations so that you can provide those services. In some of the examples that happen now, it's like with substitute teachers or with substitute bus drivers. If they don't have a nurse, they don't have a backup to go in. I mean, there's so many that are being used. If there's not, someone there, can other people be trained? Some of them can, but then that goes into another part of the conversation of who else in the building is being trained to do this and what we can, in terms of the medical need, require them to do. And so that opens up another level of conversation.
I mean, do we have a minimum number? Like right now, we budgeted 8. We don't have 8, but they're giving us we're at the $5 million. And I'm just
Reevaluating the whole.
So what would be like? Is
So
5 million minimal?
So no. So what the 5 million represents right now is just what the actual has been. So while we've budgeted for 8 million, that was the total of 65 nurses, a nurse in every school. The actual has not been more than 48, well, more than 50. And now it's actually 48. So that's what that number represents. What we're looking at right now is how we can further diversify that model so that we're not even at the 5 million, looking at some other things that we may be able to do. And in some instances, it could be for situations like you're talking about, employing our own nurses, because there's an opportunity for us to do that as well. And generally, the break-even point for that comes a lot faster because there is opportunity for you to direct the work that they're doing.
Sure. I was just wondering, do you have a general goal? Like, hey, we're thinking we can come in around 4.
I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, that's the goal, but I just didn't know if we had a skeletal.
But I would check with the suburban districts too, because they do not have nurses in every building, and the question of on-site is different if you are within minutes.
Right.
So,
Correct.
So let's be real there. Plus, I think it's, say, state, even the community health assistants or community health folks, that's beginning to be more. They're being able to do many more expansive things.
There are a lot of options.
Yeah,
a lot of options.
So in addition to the multi-million-dollar city nurse contract, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the special education budget for contracted services that are dictated by IEPs and 504 plans. So a lot of those students that have a medical need, if it's written into that plan, then they either have an employee that's attached to them, we call them one-on-ones, either an LPN or a para, and then they also have contracted services with agencies to perform sub-services when those people can't be in the building. And so I think we'll have to do a holistic picture for you.
Okay.
Because it's not just those nurses.
I got you.
There's a lot. Okay.
Well, it's also
Okay, we're going down the rabbit's hole here. Okay, so we're going to focus your eyes on the screen because there was updates that came to the document after I printed it, so I want to make sure that you're looking at the most recent. So moving on to, there are no reading specialists in ESSER. They asked about super subs, there's 102 of those. High school transformation, all those positions are title funded. There's 10 school social workers that focus on attendance, 10 counselors that are focusing on the graduation, and 12 ELL coordinators. The second question talked about a PowerPoint presentation, so we'll skip over, that's why it's highlighted. The abatements, I don't have that answered yet. I did reach out to Ms. Sellers about the group. She said nobody responded to their request for meetings, and I asked her to forward those emails to me because I couldn't find any requests in my email, but I haven't received that from her, yes.
And I don't have any requests.
I don't know, so I'm not sure what happened. You know, there's 3 Jennifer Wagners in the district, so it could very well have gone to the wrong one.
Well, let's
But
reach out to all 3 of them.
yeah, so
Got every answer.
Julie said she was going to forward me those emails when she got them from that person. Okay, so but to answer your question about why don't we post those costs, the data is not ours, and it's very difficult to get it out of the city, particularly around residential data, because it's right. But what we can do on a more regular basis is report out on the data for the CRAs and the TIFs in a more holistic fashion. So we can do that, but the data is incredibly difficult to capture from the city
I do know
and the
that
county.
there's an activist in the city that is looking into suing us and the city for not posting it, so we want to avoid that.
So-
Again, Mr.
Oh
Craig.
my
I-
gosh.
Just want to add a little thought onto what the treasurer is talking about also, and that is that, you know, the other struggle with figuring out some of these numbers is that it affects us in different ways. And so where some of these things are certainly money that would have come out of the taxes paid idea, some of it doesn't actually come out of taxes because someone else ends up paying it. But the other part is the part that we are struggling with as a district at the state level, which is that property values increase in areas where if you put in $1 million home that's abated, everything else around it becomes more expensive. And that's a realistic thing that we could talk about, which we have talked about it several times in our board meetings, but it's not something that we're going to see a straight number from the city on. It's actually becomes more about how does the state funding model also affect it? And I think that's the harder
Yes.
conversation point.
Oops. Okay. So,
Question.
yeah, so how much was spent on SORTA, Metro? There was 2 contracts that were issued this year. They've both been fully paid out, 3.9 million, and then another $500,000 on top of that.
And that's for SORTA.
Yes, just SORTA. Yes, the bus Metro passes. What are the actual unique ridership numbers for Metro? 7,588. So the text that's in blue, the text is in blue were my answers. The text in red were the superintendent's answers. If you see up on the screen there,
Don't like to use the
red. No, we hate red.
Or green.
I just put her name next to questions that I wanted her that I didn't think I could address, and I put it in red so she would easily see it. But she continued to use that. So,
Okay.
I don't know. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk about your own answers? Okay. Okay.
We're going to clean this.
Public ready. Yes.
Well, this-
Yes.
Good.
So, okay, so moving on to 23, the summary of the budgets. Fiscal year 24 school budgets and staffing ratios and per pupil stuff was shared at June 5th. You have that in the spreadsheet.
Right.
23 to 24 comparisons was shared Monday night by budget unit. And then I promised to bring the pre-COVID analysis to the next meeting. How are they similar or dissimilar? The budget, the 2 years are similar in that they're both built off of student projections. I'm talking about schools. So however the students change from by school, by grade, by condition is how the school budgets are built. So that's a similar process. How they're dissimilar is the enrollment changes from year to year.
I just had 30-some schools that got more money and 30-some schools that got less money. That more or less, is that solely, because I think this was overstated the other night. Is that solely based upon enrollment? Or are
The
there
school-
other contributory factors that changed whether it's the 30-some got more and 30-some got less?
It's all based on student enrollment.
Okay.
Projections, right? The projected enrollment.
Projected enrollment, yes.
Mhm.
And district-wide, in total, they're pretty accurate, but school by school, grade by grade, condition by condition, you get less accurate as you go.
Sure.
So, okay.
It is about enrollment, I just,
Yes. The only staffing changes that were changed was we changed the formula for assistant principals. So we added 14 assistant principals to the schools for in addition to the APs of culture. Okay. The super subs were adjusted from 82 to 102 based on school requests. And the high school transformation positions were based on test data, graduation data, and ELL populations. So those are new. Okay.
Right.
So what issues remain in the school budgets from the LSD and B town hall discussions? I think all questions were answered and shared. I sent the document to Ms. Murphy to ask her to share with the people that attended. How is district distributed Title I and ESSER dollars to the schools? Title I allocations were distributed to schools in January, and they're all based on a per pupil and certain economically different disadvantaged ranges. We do have a team looking at how maybe we can improve that process for next year. And ESSER funds are not distributed to the school because they're based off of the board adopted plan. Within school budgets, describe share allotted amounts in ELL and students with disabilities. So I gave you a little grid by fund and then by function. So I showed you gifted, K-6 special education, 7 to 12 special education, ELL, and then voc ed special ed for a total of 82.3 million. Okay. Schedule E is budgeted centrally and is in progress.
May I add, you want to ask a question?
Hey, do we really spend that little amount of money on Schedule E?
Ooh, I didn't give you a Schedule E amount yet.
Well, there's an amount in one of our notes, it's
Yeah.
how much it is, some on the long chart or someplace. I mean, it just seems small, okay.
Actually, what I was actually getting, I don't know which,
The small amount that you're thinking of was like $1 million. That was an addition, it was an increase, not what we spend.
I was just going to add for this year, with Schedule E, with the questions that came up from last year, what you would see is an increased request for this year that we actually right now have in ESSER. And that was determined. I'm still uncomfortable. There's still more work that needs to be done with it collectively as we think about where we go in 24, 25. But what we did this year is actually took all of the requests from the schools, looked at what those requests were that they could actually honor at their school as well. And we took that budget and put it together and added it to Schedule E. So that's where the addition, and I think it's actually, I believe it's 503,000 that was the increase over what it was last year, just for the Schedule E portion, but I could be wrong.
I think it's 506.
506, oh, I was close.
Yeah.
503, 506. Yeah. So that's kind of where we are right now.
How are we addressing the promise to phase class size in, oh, wait a minute, sorry, I skipped one. Are we fully staffing our schools? And we are working towards this because it's what the HR does at this time of year, right?
Okay.
How are we addressing the promise to phase class size to the lower range in the CFT contract as promised in the March 20th meeting? I think we discussed it and answered it in the June 5th board meeting.
We actually talked about this earlier in this meeting, but I'll address it again. We met with, I met with President Sellers, and we came up with a strategy for us to begin that phase-in process. And what we discussed was after we were fully staffed, then we would look at the schools that needed additional staffing and do it on a case-by-case basis versus trying to add all of the additional positions now. And so so that has been,
So it's an equity.
that's correct.
Approach.
That's correct.
We're needed. but there is a commitment
There,
to drive it down because we do spend an awful lot of money at the end around
right.
for not having the smaller classes we can possibly have. Thank you.
We are actively hiring all vacant positions, including the positions that were vacant from last year. Okay, after extensive contract review, how much money has been saved or not budgeted as a result of contracts ending? And that was 2.6 million for the extract that we did in November. And then there's a series that were issued after November that we still have to review, so we haven't done those yet. Was ROI applied anywhere beyond the contract review? Not yet. I believe the academic audits were a good start. And we just had a conversation, a meeting yesterday about how do we take it to the next level related to, and I gave them the example that you said, we spent all this money on curriculum, how do we know it's effective? That's a perfect ROI conversation. And so we're taking baby steps.
Big baby. So the stride is larger.
I you know, we worked really hard over the last few years to create this awareness and understanding and educate people on what a key performance indicator is. And the first draft of the new contracts for next year, we have more work to do.
I will tell you, not the administration and CPS, but urban districts, people can define what a key indicator is. They live by that.
I understand.
Culture.
It's a culture, yes, takes change, yes. Okay, so I've lost my places. Here's, oh, and ROI being used in central office budget development. We're trying to use the financial impact tool from Edgeonomics. Here's a summary. I wasn't sure how much detail, because the only question was, what's the summary of ESSER 1, 2, and 3? So I just gave you a very high level summary of this is the allocation, this is how much we paid through the end of May, this is how much we have encumbered. And so you can see the balance, it was 111. And so I estimated the last payroll of the summer. And that's how I came up with, I think we'll have about 108 million next year. Yes.
Say next year, you're talking about FY24 or FY25?
24, the money, 25 does not apply.
I just want to make,
They are looking to take money back, so.
I know.
Yes.
No, they're not.
Okay, so criteria and stipulations on how ESSER 3 can be spent and looming deadline. I sent an email with a couple hundred pages of guidance. Status of central office budgets, compare 23 and 24. We did that in the last board meeting. Please have a complete list of all budget department central ones. I did. I think what I'm going to do in the next version is I'm going to organize it so the similar ones are together, so you can see like all the curriculum groups together and all the HR groups together.
Most that we've gotten have been here's examples of what's in central office.
Yeah, but so you got it all on Monday night.
Now we got
I just need to organize it.
That
Yep.
that would be important. And, you know, those buckets.
The big buckets.
More bucket stuff.
Yes, I will promise to give you that.
Board to actually understand.
Yes.
We appreciate line item going lower and lower, but you know, buckets.
I appreciate it because I'm going to ask those questions, but
Yeah.
I think it should be categorized in under like if like when I asked about curriculum and then you said instructional equity goes underneath that. If they were together,
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that would
Yes.
have been great. But someone like me will ask that question.
I think
Okay.
part of it too is just, and this is certainly precedes the superintendent, but part of it too is over the last, decade or so, just the organizational chart needs a little bit more bucket approach from the standpoint of so much fragmentation on whether it's alternative programs or whether it's this or it's that. Things appear and you wonder who's the actual cost center doing that. But that's just I think has been an issue for many years. But we good?
Yeah, so I think I'm on question number 9. CPP, the preschool. So I gave you is the draft budget as of June 6th. The estimated revenues net of audit fees is 15.8 million. The CPS staff and administrative, and then remember, we pay for the diagnostic and special ed services for preschool regardless where they go. There's 2.8 million, 1.1 in non-personnel expenses. We're estimating about 7.3 million in our version of tuition assistance. So it's the qualifying students that attend our preschool classrooms, how we recognize our portion of that tuition assistance. And then CPP has so our total budget is 11.3. CPP's budget is 11.1. So we're obviously 6.6 million over the estimated revenue. So we're chewing into that prior year cash savings, right?
And the demand from CPP is a much larger demand in changing of particular parameters that it's not affordable unless we go back to.
So the budget is basically flat, but there are several new cost elements that are part of their budget that we have not agreed to yet. One of which is they wanted to increase the tuition rate by 10%. The master agreement allows for a 3% increase each year. So question number 10, who's reviewing the budget request from central office? I just kind of described the process that's used. What schools and seats are at capacity? I don't know, Superintendent, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So we'll have to actually pull that data, additional data. I know we shared it with ad hoc, but it would be based on where we were last year, and then what we would be looking at for projections for this year. So we've not run that new data with the projections for this year, but we'll have to have Jeremy run that when he returns.
I would put in just a claim for certainly, as we've seen before, CANS and LEAP. And Aiken, West High, maybe Hughes, that's where I hear the community talking about crowded, whatever. I don't know.
I'm sorry, you said CANS, LEAP, West High, and what?
Hughes.
Hughes.
But again, to Superintendent's point, Jeremy does have the capacity and what have you, but those are ones that I know maybe there's some way of dealing with. I think Aiken's problem is the 4 preschool classrooms in their wing that need to move someplace else. So it's not necessarily, we're not going to build another wing. We still work it. That can't happen right now. But
And I think at some point, and this may even be a question that I need to pose for ad hoc, but I would like at some point the board's commitment and historical perspective on what was supposed to happen at Gamble Elementary Montessori. Because we have, I think, 8 preschool classrooms at Gamble that are still there, and it's causing now Gamble is increasing, and I understand that there were some commitments made about that earlier that have not been shared with me. So I would like if I could get more information from the board on that, or if that's one to add, to a question for ad hoc, that would be helpful.
We can talk about it. Well, you won't be there this time.
Right.
We can at least talk about it even while.
I may be able to.
Okay.
Okay, so then there's a question about the construction projects, and I won't go through those, but those are there for you. I will want to share one concern here, though. And I've said this before. So Pleasant Ridge is to be completed September 30th, 2024. We're using ESSER funds to do this. So the funds have to be fully encumbered by June 30 and paid out by September 30. But if you're only going to finish it in September, we're not even going to get invoices until after September. So I've already talked to Aaron Roush about a waiver. I don't know. It's a concern and it's a risk that, yeah.
I have another suggestion around that too. We can talk about it.
Okay. Next question, are we purchasing the van fleet? Yes, it was ordered using fiscal year 23 ESSER funds.
Stop doing cartwheels.
Has the administration provided and guaranteed our dedicated 10 buses for athletics and field trips, and that's part of the central office budget process. So I think that covers it. So we'll clean this up. I took it down off of board docs because I realized that updates had happened after I had printed and posted. So we'll update it, make it pretty, and then put it back up.
6 board members on that list. Five that were contributed to it. So that's great. This is helpful. And I think today was helpful. You feel good?
Yeah, today was
Anything
long.
else we have to do?
I feel hungry.
Well, we finished
But it was
the
good.
agenda right on time.
Yes, on time. I thought we were
Time, we're
over.
like way over.
We need
The
to,
agenda, we're done with the agenda at 12:50. And then we did the stuff.
we need to extend these, calendar invites, the appropriate time that they're taking.
It's always done. You know what? Yeah, we have 4 committees.
Yeah.
See ya.
No, not
No,
yet.
not yet.
I'm asking if anybody has questions or needs from the treasurer. Superintendent had to go. We good?
If you could just send this stuff to me electronically, I'd be most appreciative.
Which stuff?
I prefer my things to be electronic. So even when you update this, when you put it on board.
You want everything that we talked about today electronically? Is that what you're
You can do
saying?
that,
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
That's my preference.
Okay, motion to adjourn. We're happy to have a guest here today. Second?
Second.
I don't think these motions mean that we have anybody. That's it. I get used to that shaking of the head and then also the WLWTQ. That's it. That's
Al Shatakati.
Al Shatakati. Do you know he was a very, very short man?
Really?
He was this tall. We haven't voted.
No, I got him a second.
second it.
Oh, let's vote. Yes, yes.
Did
Good night,
the second
folks.
come through?
Yes. All in favor?
We are adjourned.